Hello. Welcome to Phantom Homicide, the murder of Shanda Sharer. This case, well, it takes us back to Madison, Indiana, January 1992. And it's more than just a crime scene. It really feels like a study in how morality can just completely collapse, especially when driven by, adolescent obsession in this really dark group pathology.
It is a genuinely harrowing deep dive we're getting into today. It really challenges how we think about violence, particularly among young people.
Yeah.
Shanda Sharer, she was just 12 years old. And the details are, well, they're hard to hear. Subjected to prolonged torture, then burned to death.
And the fact that the attackers were 4 teenage girls. Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, Tony Lawrence, ages 15 to 17. It just completely shattered, I think, the public perception at the time about what teenagers, especially girls, were capable of.
It really did. It flew in the face of a lot of stereotypes.
So we're not really here today for those sensational headlines, the ones that, dominated everything 30 years ago. Our mission, for you listening, is a bit more surgical, maybe. We want to examine how this perfect storm happened.
Right.
This intersection of really profound, multi-generational childhood trauma, this incredibly corrosive, obsessive jealousy, and then the terrifying group dynamics that let these dark impulses escalate into hours of calculated, fatal cruelty.
We're trying to understand this psychological framework, the how and the why behind something that seems, on the surface, almost unthinkable.
Yeah, how'd they get that far?
And we have to start, really, with the engine driving this whole tragedy. It rests almost entirely with Melinda Loveless. She was 16, the ringleader.
Right.
Her motive was just, pure possessive rage. Revenge against Shanda Sharer for daring to date her ex-girlfriend, Amanda Havrin.
So it all stems from that relationship triangle.
Essentially, yes, a crime born from a relationship that was already, by all accounts, incredibly broken and distorted.
Okay, so let's begin with Shanda Sharer herself, the victim who became the focus of this terrible fixation.
It's important to remember her, the person behind the case file.
Definitely. She was born June 1979, Pineville, Kentucky.
Yeah?
By all accounts, just a typical active kid, Her parents, Stephen and Jacques, divorced. She moved to Louisville. Then later, June 1991, another move brought her to New Albany, Indiana.
And that move is key. She started the 1991 school year at Hazelwood Middle School. She was into sports, cheerleading, volleyball, softball, a normal kid.
Right.
But starting 7th grade at Hazelwood put her directly into the orbit of Amanda Havrin and, unfortunately, Melinda Loveless.
That connection, Shanda and Amanda, it didn't start smoothly, did it?
No. Ironically, they met in detention, apparently after a fight they had with each other at Hazelwood.
Wow.
But somehow, during that time, they bonded, started exchanging romantic letters, and a relationship started to form.
And that's what set Melinda Loveless off.
Immediately. Loveless was 15 at the time, and she considered Amanda her girlfriend, even though, sources suggest the Loveless-Havrin relationship was already really unstable and troubled.
Right.
Loveless saw Shanda's arrival on the scene as this massive betrayal, like an act of theft.
And the rivalry wasn't quiet, was it? It escalated pretty quickly.
Oh, very quickly. Loveless confronted Shanda at a school dance. This was early October 91.
Okay.
Then, later that month, Amanda chose Shanda as her date for some local festival. And that's when Loveless started making these public death threats against Shanda, talking about it openly.
Now, publicly?
Yeah, not subtle at all. Which brings us to a really critical point, a potential point of intervention that just didn't happen.
Shanda's parents knew about this.
They did. They were alarmed, understandably, by the relationship itself, but also by these very obvious, explicit threats. They tried to step in.
Yeah.
They transferred Shanda out of Hazelwood, put her into Our Lady of Perpetual Help, a Catholic school, in late November 1991. They were actively trying to get her away from the conflict.
Trying to break that connection, create distance.
Exactly, a protective measure.
But it wasn't enough. The threats kept coming.
Apparently so. And this is where it gets truly heartbreaking. Accounts later emerged that Havrin received letters from Loveless, letters detailing these explicit death threats against Shanda.
Physical letters.
Yes, physical evidence. And here's the part that's just gut-wrenching. Havrin stated later that she gave these letters, the ones with the death threats, to a youth prosecutor.
Wait, a prosecutor? Someone in the system saw these threats.
That's the claim. Someone in a position of authority was allegedly given direct, written proof of murderous intent stemming from this intense teenage conflict.
And what happened?
As far as we know from the available materials, nothing. No significant follow-up, no intervention based on those letters.
That's staggering.
It really is. When you have high-risk emotional aggression, especially in these volatile adolescent dynamics, escalating to explicit threats, inaction can be devastating. The warning signs were blinking red, it seems, but they weren't acted upon.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the instigator herself. Melinda Loveless, 16 years old at the time of the crime. We need to dig into her background because while she was absolutely the driving force, the source of the malice, she was also, it seems, a product of some truly profound psychological damage.
Understanding Melinda's background is crucial, not, and this is important, not to excuse the horrific actions, but to understand the mechanism, to see the fractured psychological structure that allowed this extreme possessiveness and violence to develop.
Right. Context, not excuse.
Exactly. We're talking about a childhood characterized by what experts often call severe developmental trauma, an environment that actively damaged her ability to regulate emotions, to form healthy attachments, to even understand the difference between love and destructive obsession.
And the primary source of that chaos seems to have been her father, Larry Loveless.
Yes. Larry Loveless, a Vietnam veteran. His behavior, as described in testimonies and records, it's like a catalog of dysfunction and abuse.
What kind of things are we talking about?
Well, Melinda's mother, Marjorie, described him as a sexual deviant. She testified he engaged in cross-dressing, wearing her underwear, the daughter's underwear, makeup. This kind of boundary confusion, this blurring of identity. It was pervasive.
And it affected his life outside the home, too.
Absolutely. His professional life was chaotic. He was fired from the New Albany Police Department after only 8 months. The reason? Assaulting an African-American man.
Fired from the police for assault. Okay.
Then he worked as a mail carrier, quit after just 3 months. Why? He confessed he took most of the mail home and just destroyed it.
Destroyed mail.
Intentionally destroyed it. These aren't just quirks, you know. They paint a picture of someone with zero impulse control, no respect for rules or boundaries, a deeply unstable role model for a child.
And the home environment itself, financially unstable, too.
Completely. They lived in Floyd's Knobs, which sounds like an upper-middle-class area, but Larry apparently spent money impulsively. Guns, cars, motorcycles, whatever he could get his hands on. It led to bankruptcy in 1980.
So financial chaos on top of everything else.
And real neglect. The records show Melinda and her sisters were often sent to stay with extended family. And the detail mentioned is that they would arrive hungry.
Hungry. Wow.
Yeah. So basic needs weren't being met consistently. That creates this profound insecurity, right? A constant hunt for stability, for validation, maybe even just for resources.
And then there's the violence, the
Yeah.
abuse. We have to talk about that.
We do. It's extremely difficult, but it's central to understanding Melinda. The abuse was, well, multifaceted and severe.
Okay.
Court testimonies revealed horrifying details. Larry reportedly fondled Melinda when she was an infant.
As an infant.
Yes. He also molested her 2 older sisters. And he molested their cousin, Teddy.
This is just horrific.
Teddy provided one particularly harrowing account during legal proceedings. He claimed Larry tied up all 3 sisters, Melinda and her 2 older sisters, in a garage and raped them one after another.
Oh, my God.
Now, it's important to note, Melinda's sisters didn't confirm that specific sequence in court, but the overall pattern of sexual predation and violence within that family, it's overwhelming. It's corroborated through multiple sources and testimonies.
So even if that one specific incident wasn't confirmed by everyone, the general environment was one of pervasive sexual abuse.
Yes. And beyond the sexual violence, there was just constant terror. Larry reportedly shared his wife, Marjorie, with friends. Orgies were mentioned in testimony.
Share at her.
That's the term used. Marjorie attempted suicide repeatedly throughout the girl's childhood. Imagine growing up with that as a constant backdrop. It's a visible symbol of the family's utter psychological collapse.
The instability must have been unbearable.
One specific incident stands out, just horrendously. Larry allegedly arranged for Marjorie to be gang raped.
Arranged it.
According to testimony. Afterward, she refused sex with him, until apparently he brutally raped her while the daughters were forced to listen outside the bedroom door.
This is almost impossible to comprehend.
Larry was eventually convicted of battery. This was after a beating he gave Marjorie in 1986 that put her in the hospital. So this was the landscape Melinda grew up in. A world where sex, violence, control, and what passed for love were tangled up in the most destructive ways possible.
It warps your entire understanding of relationships.
Completely. And there was a strange religious period too, wasn't there? when Melinda was about 5.
Yeah, the family joined Graceland Baptist Church for a bit. Larry even became a lay preacher.
For about 2 years, yes. But even that turned traumatic and unstable. The church apparently arranged a 5-hour exorcism for 5-year-old Melinda in a motel room.
An exorcism.
At age 5.
Yes. Imagine what that does to a child's sense of self. It likely cemented feelings of being inherently bad or flawed or even evil.
And they didn't stay with the church long after that.
No. They left after Larry was accused of attempting to rape a woman he was supposed to be counseling through the church. So the pattern just continued. Chaos, violation, instability, even within a religious context. So, fast forward a bit. The final break for Melinda seems to have been her parents' divorce. Larry filed in November 1990. Melinda was 14.
Yes. This happened after Marjorie attacked Larry with a knife. And this divorce, this departure of her father, seems to be the critical psychological break that connects directly to the crime against Shanda.
How so?
Well, despite everything, all the horrific abuse, testimony suggests Melinda had slept in the same bed as her father until this separation. He was her primary attachment figure, however deeply broken and damaging that attachment was.
Right. The devil you know.
Perhaps. So when he left, filed for divorce, then remarried fairly quickly, and eventually severed all contact. Melinda felt, according to reports, utterly crushed, abandoned.
It was a profound loss for her, despite the history.
An acute psychological crisis. It left this gaping void in her sense of self-worth, her security. Everything she knew, however terrible, was gone.
So, tying it back to Shanda. When Amanda Heavern rejected Melinda for Shanda Scherer,
It wasn't just, oh, I lost my girlfriend. For Melinda, with her history, it likely triggered that original catastrophic wound of abandonment by her father.
Ah, okay. I see the connection.
Psychologists sometimes call this a narcissistic injury. In Melinda's deeply impaired psychological world where love equaled possession and attachment was built on trauma bonds, Shanda wasn't just a rival. She was perceived as an existential threat.
Like history repeating itself.
Exactly. Shanda became a symbol, a mirror reflecting that devastating paternal abandonment. And in Melinda's distorted thinking, the only way to regain control, to reclaim Amanda, the new attachment figure, and maybe restore her own shattered sense of self, was the complete and utter elimination of the threat.
The elimination of Shanda.
Yes. This explains the obsessive, all-consuming fury, the possessiveness. It's why she couldn't let it go, why she felt compelled to recruit the others and orchestrate this ultimate act of violence. It was, in her mind, a fight for her own psychological survival.
Okay, so Loveless clearly had the motive, this deep-seated, trauma-fueled obsession, but she couldn't carry out hours of torture and murder by herself. She needed the others.
Absolutely. And Lori Tackett, who was 17, seems to have been the key enabler, perhaps even more than an enabler, the sadistic engine in some ways.
Tackett's background was also marked by abuse, right?
Yes, though different specifics than Loveless. Reports mention molestation at ages 5 and 12, and there's this really disturbing incident where her mother, described as a strict fundamentalist Christian, allegedly tried to strangle her.
Strangled her. Why?
Apparently, she caught Lori changing clothes at school. It suggests an environment where any perceived deviation, especially related to sexuality or appearance, was met with extreme violent punishment.
That kind of instability, it must have impacted her development.
Profoundly. It seems to have pushed her towards rebellion, instability, and this dark fascination with the occult. She was known for seeking attention by pretending to be possessed.
Right, the Deanna the Vampire persona.
Exactly. Deanna the Vampire. It sounds like a classic manifestation of an unstable identity, which fits with her later diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
Can you explain BPD a bit in this context?
Sure. BPD often involves intense emotional swings, a deep fear of abandonment, similar to Loveless in that way, but maybe manifesting differently, and a really unstable sense of self. For Tackett, it seems her identity wasn't fixed. It was shifting, often drawn to the dark, the extreme, the violent, maybe seeking intense sensation just to feel something real.
And she had a history of self-harm.
Yes, significant self-harm. Cutting her wrist so badly it led to a psychiatric hospitalization in March 1991, not long before the murder. She also confessed to experiencing hallucinations since childhood, and she dropped out of high school in September 91.
So her role in the crime, it wasn't just following Loveless.
It seems much more than that. Tackett's apparent willingness to not just participate, but to enthusiastically escalate the violence. Her later reported pleasure in describing Shanda's suffering. It strongly suggests sadistic personality traits, something beyond just adolescent anger or peer pressure.
So Lovelace provided the why, the jealous rage, but Tockett provided the how, the sustained cruelty.
That's a good way to put it. Tockett seems to have provided the engine for the prolonged torture aspect. She demonstrated this terrifying callousness, this sensation-seeking, that aligns with what we sometimes see described as psychopathic traits, even in adolescence.
Okay, now let's bring in the two younger girls, Hope Rippey and Toni Lawrence, both 15, the followers.
Right. While maybe less central to the initial planning, their participation was absolutely crucial for the crime to unfold the way it did.
And their backgrounds also made them vulnerable.
Very much so. Rippey knew Tockett and Lawrence from childhood. She also reportedly had a history of self-harm around age 15.
And Lawrence.
Toni Lawrence's history, reading the reports, seems particularly acute in terms of trauma among the followers. Abuse mentioned from age 9, then rape at age 14.
Oh, wow.
And this led, according to accounts, to subsequent issues like promiscuity, more self-harm, and even a suicide attempt when she was in the 8th grade.
So you have these four girls, Lovelace, the obsessive ringleader, Tockett, the sadistic enabler, and Rippey and Lawrence, the traumatized, vulnerable followers, all converging.
Exactly. Which brings us squarely to the psychology of the group itself. How does a group dynamic allow 4 individuals, even deeply troubled ones, to participate in something so horrific over so many hours?
Yeah, how does that work?
It's the concept of group pathology. The group environment acts almost like a psychological shield. It fundamentally shifts moral boundaries away from individual conscience and responsibility.
It makes things possible that wouldn't be otherwise.
Precisely. One key factor is group polarization. This is a documented phenomenon where decisions made by a group tend to be more extreme, riskier, more violent than the decisions any individual member would likely make on their own.
So the group amplified the worst tendencies.
It seems so. Lovelace brought the initial motive, the rage, but Tockett, perhaps the most sadistically inclined, likely pulled the entire group towards the most extreme violent end of the spectrum.
And they sort of fed off each other,
Yeah.
validated each other's actions.
Yes, that's mutual validation. And
Yeah.
every act of participation, no matter how small it seemed initially, Rippey stealing the watch, Lawrence agreeing to drive, Tockett making the first physical assault, it served to validate the horrifying behavior for everyone else involved. It created this terrifying positive feedback loop for cruelty.
Okay.
And crucially, they employed mechanisms of moral disengagement. This is a concept from psychologist Albert Bandura. Basically, psychological tricks people use, often unconsciously, to commit harmful acts without seeing themselves as monsters.
What kind of tricks are we talking about? How did Rippey and Lawrence especially stay disengaged?
2 mechanisms seem critical here. First, diffusion of responsibility.
Separating you blame.
Exactly. Rippey and Lawrence could mentally minimize their own roles. They could tell themselves, I didn't start this, or Melinda and Lori did the worst parts, or I was just going along. Even though their presence, their compliance, their assistance enabled the entire thing.
It makes it easier to live with, psychologically.
It does. And second, dehumanization of the victim. Shanda was constantly talked about not as a person, but as an obstacle, a copycat, something to be punished or eliminated. Once you strip away the victim's humanity in your mind, violence becomes much, much easier to inflict and witness. She wasn't seen as a 12-year-old girl anymore.
Just an it's.
Essentially, yes, an object of their collective rage.
Now, you mentioned Lawrence. Toni Lawrence showed maybe a flicker of resistance, more moral awareness.
Yes, that slight difference is interesting. She was the one who eventually confessed to a friend, which is what broke the case open. And reports indicate that during the final act, the immolation, she was the only one who refused to get out of the car. It suggests that while her own history of abuse made her vulnerable to peer pressure and being drawn in, maybe some fragment of moral awareness, some empathy, remained more accessible to her compared to Lovelace and Tockett, who seemed completely submerged in the violence. It highlights that even within intense group dynamics, individual differences can still surface.
Okay, let's walk through the events of that night and morning. Friday, January 10th, 1992. It starts with Tockett, Rippey, and Lawrence driving from Madison to New Albany to Melinda Lovelace's house.
Right. And remember, Rippey and Lawrence, the 2 younger followers, had apparently never even met Lovelace before this night. This was their introduction to the ringleader.
And Lovelace set the tone immediately.
She did. She showed them the knife she intended to use. Tockett, the enabler, was already aware of the plan that this was intended to be a murder.
But Rippey and Lawrence weren't told that up front.
The narrative Lovelace used for them to get them on board was slightly different. She framed it as needing to scare Shanda, this copycat, who was trying to steal her girlfriend, making it seem like an act of relational justice or extreme bullying rather than outright murder. That likely made it easier for them to initially agree.
A manipulation.
Definitely. So they then drive to Jeffersonville, to Shanda's father's house where she was staying.
And the lure was based on deception.
Completely. Rippey and Lawrence went to the door, pretending to be friends of Amanda Heverin. They told Shanda that Amanda was waiting for her, wanted to see her, at a place called the Witch's Castle.
The Witch's Castle? What was that?
It was a local spot, an abandoned historic site, Mistletoe Falls. It had this local legend attached to it about witches being burned there, a deliberately menacing location to choose.
Wow. Yeah.
But Shanda couldn't go right away. She had a party or something planned. She asked them to come back later, around midnight.
That delay must have frustrated Lovelace.
Reports say it infuriated her. She was ready to act now, but they had to maintain the deception, so they had to kill time.
And this leads to that really jarring contrast you mentioned earlier.
Yes. To pass the hours, the four girls drove to Louisville, Kentucky. They went to a punk rock show. The band was called Sunspring.
A punk show.
Hmm.
While planning a murder.
Exactly. And afterward, in the parking lot, Rippey and Lawrence apparently engaged in sexual activity with a couple of boys in Tockett's car.
It's just, the cognitive dissonance is incredible. Normal teenage activities right alongside this horrific premeditated plan.
It really highlights how compartmentalized their thinking must have been. They could slip into these mundane, even intimate, adolescent behaviors while still holding on to this violent intent for later. It's psychologically fascinating and deeply disturbing.
So around 12:30 a.m., they go back to Shanda's father's house.
Yes. This time, Tockett went to the door with Rippey. Shanda was apparently watching TV, seemed reluctant, but eventually agreed to go after changing her clothes.
And as soon as she got in the car,
The trap sprang. Lovelace was hidden under a blanket in the back seat, knife ready. She jumped out, held the knife to Shanda's throat, and immediately started this furious interrogation about Amanda Heverin. The terror became real, physical, instantaneous.
they drove her to the witch's castle, as planned.
Right. And once they got inside those ruins, the psychological torture began in earnest. Shanda was sobbing, terrified. They bound her with ropes.
And Lovelace started taunting her.
Yes, taunting her about her appearance, specifically her pretty hair, threatening to cut it off. It's about degradation, stripping away identity before the physical violence really starts.
And the others joined in.
They did. Rippey stole Shanda's Mickey Mouse watch, and the detail is she danced around to the tune it played. A small, specific act, but incredibly cruel, shows that detachment.
Yeah.
Tockett added to the fear. She told Shanda the castle was filled with human remains, and Shanda's would be next. They even lit a shirt on fire nearby, seemingly to emphasize the threat of burning. They only left because they got spooked, fearing the fire would attract attention.
Shanda was pleading with them, right? To take her home.
Constantly pleading, but they drove on, got lost for a while, even stopped at a gas station. Shanda was kept hidden under a blanket in the back. And it was during this period, apparently, that Tony Lawrence made that phone call.
The one to her friend.
Yes. Seeking some connection to normalcy, maybe, but pointedly not mentioning the terrified, bound girl just feet away. It speaks volumes about the dissociation required to stay in that situation, maintaining a normal facade while trapped in a nightmare.
Okay, so they get lost again, but eventually find their way onto this dark, forested logging road near Tockett's home back in Madison, Indiana.
And this seems to be the point where the plan clearly shifts from just terrorizing Shanda to outright murder.
What a terror.
Lovelace and Tockett forced Shanda out of the car, made her strip down to her underwear in the cold January night. Lovelace started the physical assault. Not just punching, but slamming Shanda's face repeatedly into her own knee. Hard enough to cut the inside of Shanda's mouth on her braces.
Just brutal.
Then Lovelace tried to slash her throat with the knife she'd brought, but the knife was too dull.
Too low. That's chilling.
It is. It meant a quick death wasn't possible with that weapon. It necessitated more violence, prolonged violence.
So, since the knife wasn't working for that,
They had to escalate. Rippey held Shanda down, actively participating in the physical restraint now, while Lovelace and Tockett stabbed her in the chest.
oh God.
Then they tried strangulation, used a rope. They strangled her until she lost consciousness.
And they thought she was dead then.
It seems so. Believing the ordeal was over, they put her body in the trunk of Tockett's car and drove to Tockett's house nearby to clean themselves up, wash off the blood.
But she wasn't dead.
No. Almost immediately after arriving at Tockett's house, they heard sounds from the trunk, screaming. Shonda's still alive.
What did they do?
This is where Lori Tackett, the sadistic element, really takes center stage. She reportedly grabbed a paring knife from the kitchen, went back outside to the car alone, and stabbed at Shanda several more times in the trunk.
Just went back and stabbed her again.
Yes. She came back inside moments later, covered in blood again, washed her hands, and then, in this moment of just staggering dissociation, Tackett reportedly performed a ritual. She read the girls' futures using her rune stones.
Rune stones. After stabbing someone multiple times.
Yeah. This attempt to slip back into her occult persona, this mundane ritual, right after inflicting near-fatal violence, it's a profound display of denial and detachment.
The horror just keeps escalating.
Yeah.
What happened next? It was late now, right?
Around 2:30 a.m., Tackett and Lovelace decided to leave Rippy and Lawrence at the house and go country cruising, just driving around aimlessly, with Shanda still in the trunk.
And Shanda was still making sounds.
Yes, gurgling sounds. They stopped the car, opened the trunk, and the sight must have been horrific. Shanda was sitting up, covered in blood, her eyes rolled back, likely a sign of severe brain injury, but she was still conscious, still alive.
What did Tackett do then?
Tackett's reaction was monstrous. She grabbed a tire iron from the car, and she beat Shanda with it, repeatedly, until she was silent. Tackett later reportedly said she could feel Shanda's head caving in.
Oh my God.
And it didn't stop there. Reports state Tackett then sexually assaulted the now likely unconscious or dying Shanda with the tire iron.
This is sickening.
And it wasn't a quick, impulsive act. The sources indicate this beating with the tire iron continued intermittently, off and on for hours as Tackett and Lovelace drove around the countryside. Hours! This sustained, repeated torture goes far beyond impulsive violence. It speaks to a level of sadistic gratification, of complete dehumanization. Shanda was no longer a person to them, just an object for their rage.
They eventually returned to Tackett's house near daybreak.
Yes. And Tackett unbelievably woke up Rippy and Lawrence and apparently laughingly described the hours of torture she and Lovelace had just inflicted.
Laughing about it.
That's the report. This recounting, this sharing of the horror, it serves to normalize it within the group. It binds the followers closer through shared, terrible knowledge.
And the ordinary world just kept intruding in these bizarre ways.
It did. Tackett's mother woke up. Initially angry they were out so late, but then disturbingly offered them breakfast. Just routine hospitality offered in a house where a car containing a brutally tortured, dying girl sat just outside. The juxtaposition is chilling.
And Rippy. She had one more cruel act.
Before the very end, yes. As Shanda lay horrifically injured in the trunk, Rippy reportedly sprayed her with Windex and taunted her, saying something like, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?"
Why Windex? It's so random and cruel.
It's profoundly significant, though. It shows Rippy actively participating in the final stages of sadism and dehumanization. It wasn't just passive following anymore. She was asserting her own cruelty, her own detachment, cementing her place in that dynamic.
Okay, the final act. They decided to burn the body.
Yes. Tackett stopped at a gas station, filled up an empty Pepsi bottle with gasoline. They drove to a place called Lemon Road, a remote field.
Was Shanda still alive then?
The reports indicate she was. Still alive when Tackett and Rippy carried her, wrapped in a blanket, out into that field.
Then.
Rippy poured the gasoline over her, and they set her on fire.
Oh, God.
And even then, Lovelace's obsessive need for completion, for certainty, kicked in. Minutes later, she made them go back and pour the rest of the gasoline on the burning body to make absolutely sure she was dead.
Absolute certainty.
Yeah, and the very next thing they did, it almost defies belief.
What was that?
It was around 9:30 Sunday morning. They stopped at a McDonald's for breakfast.
McDonald's after that.
Yes. And reports say they were laughing and comparing Shanda's badly burned body, which was later found in that characteristic defensive posture called the pugilistic stance. Common in burn victims, they compared it to the sausages they were eating.
I have no words for that.
It encapsulates the total moral vacuum. The crime was done, and they marked it with breakfast and jokes. Zero remorse. Zero recognition of the human life they had just extinguished.
But the group started to unravel pretty quickly after that, didn't it?
It did. The pressure was too immense. Later that same day, Sunday, Tony Lawrence confessed to a friend, and Melinda Lovelace confessed to Amanda Hevron, the object of her obsession, and another friend, Crystal Wathen.
Did you just tell them?
She apparently went further, showed Heverin and Wathen the car trunk, still containing evidence Shanda's bloody handprints, her socks. Then Lovelace reportedly kissed a horrified Amanda Heverin and pleaded with her to keep silent. The very act of trying to preserve the relationship that motivated the murder ultimately exposed the crime and destroyed that relationship completely.
So Shanda's body was discovered that Sunday morning, January 11th, by two brothers out for a walk.
Yes, Dawn and Ralph Foley. Initially, they thought it was a mannequin that someone had discarded and burned.
A mannequin.
That's how badly burned it was. But then they got closer and realized the horror. They noted the body seemed posed, almost suggestively, and that the face and hands were particularly badly burned, a clear, albeit crude, attempt to hinder identification.
And the police investigation moved quickly once Lawrence started talking.
Very quickly. Lawrence and Rippey, accompanied by their parents, went to the sheriff's office that Sunday evening. They gave rambling, likely terrified statements, but they identified Shanda and implicated Lovelace and Tackett.
And they were arrested soon after.
Yes. Lovelace and Tackett were arrested. Formal identification of Shanda required dental records because of the condition of the body.
Given the absolute brutality and the planning involved, how are they charged?
Due to the severity, the calculated nature of the torture, all four girls were charged as adults despite their ages.
Did it go to trial?
No. They all eventually accepted plea bargains. This was likely influenced by their youth, their documented histories of abuse, and the desire to avoid the possibility of the death penalty, which was on the table since they were charged as adults.
Okay, so what were the sentences?
Lovelace and Tackett, as the primary instigators and perpetrators of the violence, received the longest sentences, 60 years each.
60 years.
Hope Rippey also initially received 60 years, but that was later appealed and reduced to 35 years.
Why the reduction for Rippey?
Appeals can consider various factors, perhaps arguing again her age, her role compared to Lovelace and Tackett, her own background. The specifics of the appeal's success aren't detailed here, but her sentence was significantly shortened.
And Tony Lawrence, the one who cooperated.
Right. Due to her cooperation with the investigation and her arguably lesser role in the direct infliction of the most extreme violence, especially the final acts, she received a sentence of 20 years, specifically for criminal confinement rather than murder.
Lovelace tried to appeal later, didn't she? Years after the conviction.
She did. In 2007, she filed an appeal. Her argument was quite specific.
Why was it?
She claimed that the severe abuse she had endured throughout her childhood had rendered her, in her words, profoundly retarded, and therefore legally incompetent to have understood and accepted the plea bargain back when she was 16.
Did that argument succeed?
No, the appeal was rejected in 2008. It highlights this incredibly difficult tension in the justice system, doesn't it?
How so?
How do you balance the need for accountability for truly heinous acts, for calculated malice sustained over hours, with the undeniable reality that the perpetrator was herself a victim of profound developmental trauma that clearly impaired her judgment and emotional regulation? The court ultimately prioritized accountability for the crime itself.
So they all served significant time. When were they released?
The releases were staggered over nearly 2 decades. Tony Lawrence served the least time due to her sentence and cooperation, getting out in 2000.
Okay.
Hope Rippey was released in 2006 after the sentence reduction.
Right.
Lori Tackett was released in 2018. And there's a grim sort of poetry to the date her release reportedly happened on the 26th anniversary of Shanda's murder. Wow. That's eerie. And finally, Melinda Lovelace, the ringleader, was the last one released in September 2019.
The impact of this crime obviously extended far beyond the perpetrators and the immediate victim, Shanda's family.
Absolutely devastating. Stephen Scherer, Shanda's father, he never recovered. Shanda's mother, Jacques Vaught, stated quite plainly that he drank himself to death. He died of alcoholism in 2005, only 53 years old. It's a reminder of the slow, quiet destruction that this kind of trauma leaves in its wake.
Just heartbreaking. And what about Larry Lovelace, Melinda's father, the source of so much of her trauma? Did he face consequences?
He did, to some extent. Based on testimony that came out during Melinda's sentencing hearings in 1993, Larry Lovelace was arrested, charged with rape and sexual battery related to the abuse of his daughters and cousin.
Was he convicted?
It was complicated. Most of the charges were ultimately dropped because the statute of limitations had expired for many of the alleged offenses.
Okay.
However, he did plead guilty to 1 count of sexual battery. He served some time in prison and was released in 1995.
And then he sued the jail.
Yes. In a move that perhaps speaks volumes about his personality, after his release, he unsuccessfully sued the Floyd County Jail for $39 million.
$39 million. On what grounds?
His complaints were about things like not being able to read the newspaper or being prevented from sleeping in his bed during the daytime hours while incarcerated. His focus, even after everything, seemed to remain squarely on his own perceived inconveniences.
Unbelievable. But the aftermath also includes something quite unexpected, involving Shanda's mother, Jacques Vaught.
Yes, something truly remarkable and for many quite difficult to understand.
What did she do?
In 2012, years after the crime and after Larry Loveless's release, Jacques Vaught made an extraordinary gesture. She donated a dog named Angel, in Shanda's memory, to a program called the Indiana Canine Assistance Network, or ICANN.
Okay, a service dog program.
Yes, but she specifically arranged for that dog, Angel, to be trained by Melinda Loveless, who was still incarcerated at the time.
Wait, she gave a dog in her murdered daughter's name for her daughter's killer to train?
Exactly. It was a decision that, understandably, drew significant public criticism. Many people couldn't fathom it.
Why did she say she did it?
Jacques Vaught defended her decision powerfully. She framed it as a necessary step for her own healing and perhaps for finding some meaning in the tragedy. Her quote was something like, "If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better."
Wow. That's an incredible capacity for forgiveness, or at least for seeking some kind of positive outcome.
It demonstrates immense personal resilience, a path toward healing that is almost unimaginable for most people in her situation, even if it remained controversial. #tag outro.
So, bringing this all together, this horrific case, it really does serve as this stark, almost textbook example of how things can go so terribly wrong.
It truly does. It shows with brutal clarity how individual pathologies, Loveless's severe trauma leading to that obsessive, possessive attachment style, combined with Tackett's apparent underlying sadistic traits, how these things can merge with the inherent vulnerabilities of adolescence.
Like poor impulse control, unstable identity.
Exactly. Poor impulse control, the search for identity, the adolescent brain still developing its capacity for long-term consequence planning. All of that gets amplified exponentially when you add the group dynamic.
The group providing permission, validation.
Permission, validation, diffusion of responsibility. It created this perfect storm where individual darkness combined with group pressure to achieve this peak level of sustained violence. It was a convergence of toxic environment, psychological damage, and group pathology.
We've spent this deep dive tracing that psychological blueprint, how and why could possibly align for this to happen. But it forces you to look outward too, doesn't it? The warning signs, they weren't exactly subtle here.
No, they weren't. We've seen the absolutely horrific, fatal power of relational aggression when it's amplified by a group. But the provocative thought, the question we really have to leave you, the listener, with is this. Considering the documented abuse and violence in the backgrounds of all four of these girls, and especially considering those explicit death threats against Shanda threats that were reportedly given directly to a youth prosecutor.
What specific protective factors could have intervened earlier in the lives of Loveless, Tackett, Rippey, Lawrence? What support systems failed them? And maybe more importantly, what responsibility do our broader social structures, schools, communities, the justice system bear when such obvious, screaming warning signs are tragically completely ignored?
Yeah. What could have been different?
It's a heavy question. Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussions, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.